There was no kitchen in the cellar, just a table with a chrome machine. Industrial grade. Heavy. It was the only way to feed 20 people who could no longer chew. The discovery began with a tax seizure. The Radcliffe Estate had been in arrears since 1952. On November 14, 1958, 2 county assessors and Sheriff Newell arrived to inventory the property. The main house was empty. The furniture was draped in white sheets. The air was cold and stale. There was no sign of Lord Julian Radcliffe. The assessors moved to the grounds. The estate covered 400 acres of dense woodland. The primary interest was the timber value. They found the main stables efficiently. They cataloged the equipment. Then they approached the hunting lodge on the northern perimeter. The sheriff noted that the estate's hunting canines, usually allowed to roam, refused to cross the tree line leading to the lodge. The canines whined and paced at the edge of the clearing. Sheriff Newell proceeded on foot. The lodge was a single-story stone structure built in 1910. The windows were shuttered. The heavy oak door was unlocked. Newell pushed it open. The interior was warmer than the outside air. A fire had recently burned down to ash in the grate. Lord Radcliffe was in the study. He sat in a high-backed leather wing chair facing the dead fire. He was dressed in formal evening wear. His head rested against the wing of the chair. Sheriff Newell checked for a pulse at 2 p.m. There was none. Rigor mortis had not yet set in. The coroner later estimated the time of death at 9 a.m. that morning. The cause of death was determined to be a massive cerebral hemorrhage. It was natural, swift, and clean. Lord Radcliffe had died waiting. On the small table beside him sat a crystal decanter of scotch, 1 empty glass, and a leather appointment book. The book was open to November 14th. 3 names were written there in a steady hand. The room was orderly. Books lined the walls, but the desk in the center of the room drew the assessor's attention. It was a heavy mahogany piece. In the center lay a pair of dental extraction pliers. They were stainless steel, clean, and rested on a velvet cloth. When the assessor touched them, the metal was still warm from the nearby lamp. To the right of the pliers was a wooden cabinet with shallow drawers. It resembled a map case. The sheriff opened the top drawer. It did not contain maps. It contained 12 small pouches made of soft, tanned leather. They were arranged in perfect rows. Each pouch was tied shut with a black silk ribbon. Sheriff Newell untied the first pouch. He poured the contents onto the desk blotter. They rattled like dice. 32 human teeth scattered across the leather surface. They were a complete set. Molars, incisors, canines. The roots were still attached, stained dark at the tips. They had not been lost to decay. They had been pulled. The sheriff examined the pouch itself, and it was hand-stitched. Embroidered on the front in gold thread were 3 initials. AJM. Below the initials was a dollar amount, $4,500. The embroidery was precise. The stitching was tight. It was the work of someone with significant time and patience. They opened the remaining drawers. There were 47 pouches in total. Each contained a full set of adult teeth. Each was embroidered with initials and a sum of money. The amounts ranged from $2,000 to $50,000. The total sum represented in the cabinet exceeded $500,000. The investigation turned to the AJM on the first pouch. Records identified him as Arthur James Miller, a textile heir reported missing in 1955. His family believed he had moved to Europe to escape creditors. The dates on the pouches corresponded to the dates the individuals were last seen at social engagements in the county. The search of the lodge continued. Behind a heavy tapestry in the hallway, they found a door. It was locked. Sheriff Newell forced the mechanism. The room beyond was tiled in white ceramic. It smelled of antiseptic and clove oil. In the center of the room stood a barber's chair, modified with leather restraints on the armrests and headrest. A surgical tray stood next to the chair. It held an array of dental elevators, forceps, and bone files. They were arranged by size. There was no dust. The sink in the corner was dry, but the trap contained fragments of enamel. On the counter lay a logbook. It listed dates, anesthetic administered, and extraction duration. The logbook revealed the pattern. Lord Radcliffe hosted high-stakes card games. When a guest incurred a debt they could not honor by dawn, they were offered an alternative settlement, the extraction of their identity. The entry for Arthur Miller noted, subject compliant, debt cleared, released 4 a.m. But Arthur Miller had never been seen again. The released notation was a lie. The assessors went back outside. They looked at the ground where the canines refused to walk. The soil was uneven. The sheriff called for shovels. They began to dig 10 yards from the lodge porch, beneath a line of ornamental hydrangeas. They found the first crate at 3 feet. It was a pine shipping box, roughly 3 feet long. Inside was Arthur Miller. He was emaciated. His jaw was collapsed, the healing process having warped the bone structure. He was not alone in the earth. The team found 12 crates that afternoon. But the count was wrong. 47 pouches, 12 bodies, 35 subjects were unaccounted for. The sun began to set. The temperature dropped. Sheriff Newell returned to the lodge to examine the appointment book again. The 3 names for that evening were prominent local businessmen. A noise came from the cellar. It was a rhythmic scraping sound. Metal on stone. It stopped, then started again. The access door was located in the pantry, hidden beneath a rug. It was padlocked from the outside. The sheriff used the bolt cutters from the truck to snap the hasp. The stairs were wooden and steep. The air that rose up was warm and humid. It smelled of unwashed bodies and soup. A single bulb hung from a wire at the bottom. The basement had been converted. The coal chute was welded shut. The space was divided into small partitioned stalls using chicken wire and lumber. In the stalls, they found them. 22 men and women. They were sitting on cots or pacing the small enclosures. They were dressed in expensive evening wear that had deteriorated on their bodies. Tuxedos turned to rags. Silk gowns stained with years of filth. When the sheriff descended, they did not call for help. They couldn't speak. Their mouths were caved in. Without teeth to support the structure, their lips had curled inward, giving them the appearance of the elderly, though many were in their 30s. They made soft, guttural noises. They shrank back from the flashlight beam. They had been living in the dark. On a table in the center of the basement sat a large pot of gruel. Next to it was a blender. It was an industrial model, heavy and chrome. This was how they were fed. The guests were kept alive, processed, and maintained. The debt was paid, but the hospitality never ended. Investigation of the stalls revealed personal items: a gold lighter, a cigarette case, a pearl clutch. These items were polished and kept on small shelves. The prisoners clung to the symbols of the status that had brought them there. They were still guests at the party. They were just waiting for the game to end. One subject, a woman in a tattered blue gown, approached the wire. She held out a hand. In her palm was a small piece of paper. The sheriff took it. It was an IOU. I, Elizabeth Vance, owe Lord Radcliffe the sum of $12,000. It was dated August 9th, 1956. She pointed to her mouth, then to the paper. Medical teams arrived at 6 p.m. The extraction of the subjects was slow. They were photophobic and disoriented. Many had to be sedated. Dr. Merritt, the county physician, examined them on the lawn. He noted that the gum tissue had healed perfectly. The surgery was expert. It wasn't butchery, it was professional dentistry. Police questioned Dr. Merritt about his relationship with Radcliffe. He admitted to visiting the estate socially, but denied knowledge of the clinic. However, a search of his vehicle revealed a medical bag containing specific anesthetics, matching the logbook. Dr. Merritt was arrested at 8 p.m. He died in custody of a heart attack 2 days later. The search for the remaining 13 subjects continued for 3 days. They were never found on the estate. The ledger indicated they had been transferred. No destination was listed. The only clue was a receipt from a private sanitarium in Quebec, found in Radcliffe's safe. The trail ended at the border. The 22 survivors were transported to the state hospital. Their rehabilitation was impossible. The psychological conditioning was absolute. They believed they were still at the estate. They refused solid food even after being fitted with dentures. They waited for the bell to ring for dinner. The investigation revealed the financial reality. Radcliffe was destitute. The debts were fabricated. The card games were rigged. He was not collecting money, he was collecting leverage. The pouches were his insurance. But he never cashed them in. He kept them. He polished the pliers. He fed the guests. The survivors struggled in the hospital environment. They congregated in corners, mimicking the layout of the basement stalls. They communicated in rasping sounds and soft hums. Staff reported that at night, they would organize themselves by the amount they owed. The hierarchy of the debt remained their social structure. One survivor, a former banker named Henry Reed, began to draw on the walls of his room. He drew the lodge, he drew the chair, and he drew a figure standing behind the chair. Not Radcliffe, a woman. Tall, wearing a nurse's uniform. The drawing suggested Radcliffe had an assistant. Investigators returned to the logbook. The handwriting changed in 1956. The strokes became lighter, more slanted. The anesthetic-administered entries were signed with a single initial, E. Evelyn Rothwell, Radcliffe's sister. She had been institutionalized in 1940 but released into his care in 1953. Evelyn was not found in the house. She was not in the basement. A warrant was issued, but the estate was vast. On November 20th, a surveyor found a small ventilation pipe sticking out of the ground near the old ice house, half a mile from the lodge. It was concealed by brush. The pipe led to a root cellar. The door was buried under 2 feet of soil. It had been sealed from the outside. When they broke the seal, they found a small living space, a cot, a lamp, and a woman sitting in the dark. Evelyn Rothwell. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, pristine white. She did not resist. She asked if the guests had been fed. She told the sheriff that her brother didn't have the stomach for the extractions. He only watched. She did the work. She claimed she was helping them. They couldn't pay, she said. So we took what they didn't need. Evelyn described the procedure with clinical detachment. She explained how she clamped the jaw, how she severed the periodontal ligament, how she ensured the root didn't break. She was proud of the pouches. She called them her needlepoint. But then she asked about the special guests, the ones in the attic. The police had cleared the attic. It was empty. Evelyn smiled. She said they were very quiet. She said they had paid their debt in full. The sheriff returned to the lodge. They checked the attic again. Nothing. Then they measured the dimensions. The interior hallway was 4 feet shorter than the exterior wall. There was a false bulkhead at the end of the corridor. They took sledgehammers to the plaster. The space was 3 feet wide. Inside, standing upright, were 3 figures. They were mummified. Their skin was like parchment. They were dressed in 1920s formal wear. They were wired into the framing of the house. Metal brackets held their spines to the studs. These were the original debtors. Their mouths were open, locked in a silent scream. The pouches with their teeth were nailed to their chests. The dates on the pouches were 1924, 1926, and 1928. This had not started with Arthur Miller. It had been the family business for 30 years. Radcliffe and his sister had inherited the debt and the method of collection. The appointment book on the dead man's table wasn't for a game. It was for the installation of 3 new studs in the wall. Evelyn Rothwell was deemed unfit for trial. She was committed to the criminally insane ward at Waterbury. She spent her days embroidering small scraps of cloth with initials. She died in 1974. The 22 survivors were never reintegrated into society. Most died within 5 years of discovery, succumbing to pneumonia or heart failure. They were buried in a potter's field, their names listed, their debts finally canceled. The Radcliffe Hunting Lodge was burned to the ground by the fire department in 1959. The land was sold to the state. The timber was harvested. But the hunters in that county still say their canines won't cross the tree line where the garden used to be.